Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Juice, and today I'm gonna be back with another video. Today we're gonna be playing some Apex. Well, not just playing Apex, but I'm actually going to be explaining my settings. I'm doing like a little bit of a settings tutorial, I guess, for anybody who's like new to the game or anybody that has enjoyed my content and wants to know my settings specifically or what I use, my thoughts, my opinions, everything like that. So I'm gonna try and make this as short as possible, but I probably am gonna be talking a lot about like specific settings, just because I think it'll be helpful for people who want to know what specific settings do. And I do think these settings are really, really good in the current meta and in current, 2023 Apex. But yeah, specifically, my settings are a little bit weird, but we'll get into everything. I'm gonna go through the gameplay settings real quick because obviously gameplay is very, very easy. So as you can see here, compact over default on my interact prompt style. Now when you put this on default, it'll basically show this whole menu, and you can see how big and clunky this is. If I'm running around looting, I don't want to see these big, boxes. So I have it on compact, and boom, look, it just says sniper stock. Very, very small. You can quickly grab it. You'll know like what you need. You can literally see on the bottom right corner, like and the HUD, you can literally see what you need. So it's like, oh, I need the barrel or whatever. It should be pretty easy to do. And I don't think having it on default is very helpful. Unless you're new to the game, then maybe go default. Button hints, kind of same thing. I keep mine on off, but like if you guys are new to the game and you need to see like, for example, what your heal button is or whatever, you might want to keep it on. You need to know which button your Q is or which button to switch weapons, whatever it is. You might need these on. But for somebody like me who really just knows my settings, in by my heart, I don't need those on. Crosshair damage feedback, I usually use X shield. I used to use off, which you can see the advantage of having it off is you don't have that big crosshair in your way, but sometimes it can be kind of hard to track and to like really make sure you hit all your shots when it's off. And then X is just like, I don't know, I just don't really see a use for X rather, per se. Just doesn't really make sense. I think X with shield icon is just so much more helpful and is pretty much what all the pros use. And it just makes the most sense to me, so that's what I use. Damage you want on stacking, that is just not even up for debate. Anybody puts it off or like floating or both, it just is so unnecessary. You just want it stacking so you can see all the damage at once. Paying opacity, I keep my default, but some people can do fade it. Doesn't really matter. The only reason I would do all the way on default instead of fade it is because, especially in playing comp, you want to know where your teammates are pinging, like, oh my god, we're going to land over here on a Valkyrie or something. You want to be able to see that ping, and if it's faded, you might miss it, so I keep mine on defaults. Obituaries, you want that on. Minimap rotation, this is pretty much preference. I used to use it on, I use it off now. Preference-based. Next up, we have weapon auto cycle on empties. So pretty much what this does, when it's on, and you shoot all your ammo, it'll auto switch to like my R9, so it'll just pull it out, and I don't have to switch. But I'm so used to switching my weapon anyways when I run out of ammo that I just keep it off because, like, I know, oh, I just ran out of Nemesis ammo. I'm gonna switch to my R9, and I already am pulling it out, So I'm not gonna change it. It doesn't make sense for me to put it all on. But if anybody wants it on, then that's by all means go for it. Auto sprint, I also keep mine off, but some people like it on. That's just completely up to you. I'd recommend double tap sprint off. I don't think it's really helpful at all. And jetpack control, definitely want hold. Toggle would just be really, really hard to do, I think. And as a controller player, Valk main, I think hold is very beneficial. Incoming damage feedback, I always keep this on 3D, but I guess you could do any of these. I just think 3D is the best looking, and it kind of helps you find the information the best. Going down, we have, this is very much an important one. You want this off because if you are going for a shield swap and you open a box and get shot, you're not going to be able to grab that shield swap if this is on. Because it'll knock you out of the box if this setting is on. So you want this to be off. Pretty much nobody puts this on. I don't know any player that would ever use this on. Hop up, pop up. I also keep this off, but some people who are newer to the game, this is very similar to the first settings. If you're new to the game, you might want to keep this on, but as somebody who knows pretty much everything about the game, I want to keep this off. Don't really need that extra info. Sherman mode, none of this stuff really matters. It's all preference. My reticle that I use is a nice green. I used to just use the white. Sometimes I use yellow, but that's pretty much it. Green, yellow, white. Something that stands out from the map that you can kind of tell the difference. Sometimes green can blend in because there's a lot of green on a lot of maps, but for the most part, green is pretty good. Lime green. And then my laser sight, I just put this as a purple. I'm honestly gonna put it on like a white. I think white would look pretty cool, so we're gonna change it up a little bit. And yeah, see how that goes. Ooh, look at that. It's kind of cool on the white. The only other setting here is colorblind mode that I would recommend. I actually love mine on Trit, but you could put it off. You could put it on any of these. This is more preference based, but I just really like the colors on this one, even though I'm not colorblind myself. I just think this is very, very good looking. So that's the reason I've always used it, and I'm just used to it. Now, mouse and key, as this is a roller settings video, I'm not going to go over mouse and key, but I'm just going to real quickly go through my settings. As you can see here, this is what I use. I'm not a mouse and key player. I do play other games on mouse and key, but in this specific game, I'm just not a mouse and key player. Going to controller, this is where I have to start explaining stuff. Pretty much, button layout is very much like the button puncher, I believe it is, which switches the melee and the crouch. So what that does is, I can show you, my crouching is on my right stick, which is also my stick to aim. The reason I use this is because we got an R9 up here. Up close, I can kind of just like spray and spam crouch at the same time and still pretty much aim and hit all my shots there, which to me is something that's very important, is being able to aim and do other things at the same time. So for example, my jump is a default jump, right? It's X, but I don't actually use X to jump because guess what? If I use X to jump, I'd have to take my thumb off my aiming. Whereas if I jump, I use a paddle, a Scuf controller. So I use my paddle and boom, I'm jumping and I'm still aiming at the same time. And so same thing goes with crouch. I'm crouching, but I'm also aiming at the same time. So those are very, very important. And melee doesn't really matter. I also have a paddle for melee, which I can just use here. If I really wanted to, I can still aim and hit my melee at the same time. That's something that's really easy to do. And then I will say I use a Scuf impact controller, which has 4 paddles. So I also have my, well, let me shoot real quick. I also have my reload on one of the paddles, which I don't really use very much because when I'm reloading, I'm not aiming. So I can kind of just use that on my square. And then my other one is to switch weapons, which sometimes I will use. It just depends. But I'm also just really used to using triangle to switch weapons. Because if I'm switching weapons, I run out of ammo, say my Nemesis. I'm going to jump, and then I'm going to pull up my gun most of the time. Or I'm going to slide, and I'm going to pull out my other gun. And that, I'm not going to be shooting while doing that, or aiming while doing that. So it's not really necessary for me to change my switch weapons. And it's just easier to do it on the paddle. But anyways, that is why those are all the same. And then the only other things that change is my ADS and my shooting button, and then my tactical and my ping. So those are pretty much all just mirrored. It used to be the opposite. So the way you throw Q is with L1, but for me, L1 you can see does ADS, and then L2 used to be ADS, but for me this starts my Q. Similarly, R2 is the ping, whereas R1 is the shoot, which is the complete opposite of how the default settings are. I watched Verholst explain this, and if anybody wants to, go watch like a Verholst settings video where he explains this very, very well. And ever since I saw that video, I've changed it, and I felt like it's so much more efficient when you can kind of just, you know, tap and, you know, aim and shoot one bullet. Or when you tap R1, you can kind of just like tap it like that. Versus if you go R2, it's like halfway on, and sometimes you won't all the way hit it, so you'll accidentally end up, you think you shoot, but you don't actually fully shoot because the trigger like goes far down, if that makes sense. It's hard to explain, but he explained it very well. So, like I said, check out Verholst's settings video, and he explains it very, very well. But for my specific settings, that's what I use. And like I said, I use a paddle, so half my buttons are just very comfortable. I don't really have to stress my fingers and use a crazy claw. I can just pretty much use my paddles and be very, very comfortable while shooting as well and aiming down. So moving on, I use a default on my stick loadout, or my stick layout rather. My interact reload button, I use tap. Obviously, everybody wants tap. Holding, you'd have to like shoot, and then you have to hold down. I believe you'd have to hold down square to reload, or you'd have to double tap it. Am I on double tap? Hold to use? No. And either way, you want tap to use and reload. It's just like everything else just doesn't make sense. Yeah, so this one would be hold to use and tap to reload. Like, what's the point? Just use tap on both. You know, you tap your ADS and that works. You tap your Q and that works. Otherwise, you have to hold down your Q and then, you know, do that, or you have to hold down your reload, which doesn't make sense. You just tap it once and it does it. That's the best way to do it. That's what I'd recommend. Crouch button, a lot of pros use hold, and the reason for this is because you can really quickly crouch spam. And it's really easy to crouch spam when you use hold. The thing is, I don't personally like it that much because I don't know, I just never got used to it. So I use mine to toggle, but I think either one of them is fine. I think if you're a good player and you think that hold's better, then go for it. I may actually end up switching to hold in the future. I'm just really used to toggle at this point. Moving on, we have aim button, which is on hold. I don't know anybody who uses toggle. Maybe some mouse and key players, I think, use toggle. I think his Watson tried it once, but most people just use hold. It's a lot easier to use. Survival slot, I would recommend keeping this on if you're just somebody who wants to be able to throw down a heat shield real quick or throw down an evac. But I keep it off personally, and that just means I have to go to my inventory survival slot here and then press X on it to pull it out. And the only benefit is I can, spectate my weapons, or if I had like a character, I don't know, Loba, where I don't have her heirloom, I can spectate my fist as I'm running. It pretty much pulls away the whole HUD, so I can kind of get a good look at what's going on in front of me. And then if it's a character like Valk, where you have cool heirloom, you can kind of just you can do the whole like spinny, spin your heirloom, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, it's not like a setting that's going to be groundbreaking, for example. It doesn't matter if it's on or off, in my opinion. I think it's better if it's on because you actually have the whole survival slot button where you can throw down an evac tower or throw down a heat shield. And there's some situations where you might be in zone, taking a lot of damage to the zone. You need to throw a heat shield down real quick, and you just hit the survival slot button, and it works. Versus if you have to get to the inventory, you have to go all the way down here, grab it, and then throw it down, which takes maybe an extra half second, which could save your life. Trigger dead zones, you want that on none. Menu cursor speed, this is pretty much just whatever preference you want, because you want to be able to get a shield swap really quickly, and in doing so, you want like a comfortable cursor speed. In general, usually you just use for me, I just use my right stick, and so say the shield swap is right here where these snipers are. I'll just go in, boom, boom. Go in, boom, boom. Right, so I pretty much have it like down to a T. Like I know how much I have to pull down. But whatever's comfortable with you is probably the best thing. And in general, most settings, whatever you're comfortable with is going to be the best thing for you to use. Now going to my sensitivity, I use a 4.3. This is like the God sense. Most players use 4.3. Going much above, I'd say 5 is like the max I would go, and like 3 would be like the lowest I would go. Because 3 is not bad. It's just a little bit slow, especially if you want to like turn around. It's really slow. But yeah, so I'd recommend 4. I think 4 is really good. And then same thing with ADS. I wouldn't go much above 4, and I wouldn't go much below 2. I think 3 is just a good hybrid in between. 3 is really good for tracking. Anything above 3, you don't really need that much more to track. Like you can kind of see right here. I can kind of track this guy really well in 3. Going to per optic settings, I don't actually use any of these. I used to experiment with it, like a 5 on the 2x, which is really, really high. I'm surprised it's not 4. But yeah, this is kind of like my customs, but I don't really ever use them. I just use the 3 for the ADS. Response curve, linear versus classic. I use classic personally, and I think they're both really, really good and really strong. The reason I do classic is 1, I'm very, very comfortable and very used to it. 2, I think the ADS or hipfire rather is very, very effective on classic. I don't know why, but I think it's really, really strong. I just think it's also because I'm so used to it. I just feel like hipfiring on classic is better than hipfiring on linear, whereas linear I just feel like I have less control, and classic I feel like it's way more gluey when I'm hipfiring. So this of course is me on linear, and I don't really ever play linear. I also don't have small dead zone on, and my controller definitely could use small dead zone on because I don't have the best controller. I mean, Scuf controller is really good, don't get me wrong, but on linear it still is pretty bad. But you can see there's definitely some beams on the hipfire no matter what, some beams on the ADS. Linear is really, really good and really, really gluey as well. I just think it's a little bit worse for me, and I just prefer using classic personally. The third reason for classic is you actually get the speed up time when you turn really far. So say I'm like shooting somebody here and I start getting shot behind, I actually will turn quicker than if I was on linear. I'd turn quicker here. The only other solution is if you're on linear, just put a higher sense and play linear, and then you'll be able to turn around just as quick as classic. But you can see this even on 5, it feels a little bit slower than on classic. The speed up time definitely helps out on classic. And then all the other variations here, like high velocity, fine aim, and steady. I've never really used them. Steady actually is like crazy. I don't know. I've never used any of these, and I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's classic or linear. And then if you use linear, you might need to go on small dead zone if you use linear. But there's no need to use small dead zone in classic. Just go straight to none, and you'll have better control over your recoils and stuff like that. Movement zone, you want this to be small. You never want this to be large. Any dead zone, you want to be as small as possible without giving your controller too much stick drift. Inverted look, never want inverted look on. That would be just complete whack, like a challenge type video, but yeah, you want that off. And vibration, please turn that off. Vibration is going to mess you up more than it helps you. My ALC settings, I actually used to use ALC, and it's very similar to linear, I think, my settings. Minus the fact that I don't have much dead zone, so I have like no stick drift. But yeah, this specific ALC settings is very similar to linear, so if anybody is into ALCs and want like a good starting, because you can change this a little bit by little bit, so if you want like a starting ALC settings, then I would recommend using these. Of course, you can change it however you want. Like I said, you can turn something up, like your yaw speed, you can turn it up a little bit, you can turn your ADS yaw speed up a little bit, target compensation on, melee target compensation on. You want those both on. And then I also have custom per optic settings on this one versus other, like my default settings, I don't have per optic settings on. So yeah, these are cool ALC settings. I don't really recommend them. I think it's just better to go 4-3, and I don't use ALC anymore, like I said, so I keep them off. But if you do want ALCs, go for it. Be my guest. Now, the last thing is going to be your video, which obviously everybody has their own resolution. I use 1440 because I have a 1440 monitor, but honestly, all you need is 1080. I think it's a little overkill to have 1440, but if you have it, then it's cool, right? My brightness, I use 55, but I think anything between like 45 to like 65 is good. I think 55 is a little bit over. Being a little bit over 50, it actually helps you like see stuff, in my opinion, more than other settings, so that's why I use it. 104 in field of view I think is pretty good as well. Anything between like 100 and 110, you don't really want to go below 100, because then your FOV, you're going to see jack shit, for lack of better words. You're literally just not going to see anything, so yeah, and then 110 is also really good, but I think 104 is just really cool. And I remember it was his Watson that kind of got me into 104. It was my friend that told me about his Watson using 104, and it's actually like a low-key godsend. So I've used it since then, and I've really enjoyed it. I would consider going like to 106 even, but I'm just so used to 104 at this point that I just keep it at 104. You want your FOV ability scaling disabled. You want your sprint view shake. You want that to be minimum. And every other setting here is either going to be disabled or low or none, except for NVIDIA Reflex. You want that enable boosted. Everything else is going to be as low as possible, and then bilinear on texture filtering. Everything else just as low as possible, and that's the recommended settings for video. Moving on to audio, I usually use my master volume at 55. For the purpose of this video, I kept it low so you don't hear like the game sound over me. But you can see, I definitely hear the audio very, very well on 55. I also keep my sound effects at 100. I don't use any sort of in-game like character dialogue. I used to, but I kind of turned it off because I feel like it can cluster the comms sometimes if you're in competitive and your teammates are trying to talk to you, and then you hear your character say, "This little viper's just got her fangs," or whatever, whatever Valk says. You'll hear that go off, and you're like, "What'd you say, teammate? Sorry, I can't hear you." So I think it just clusters comms. Even in ranked, it kind of clusters comms, so I keep it off. But everything else, I mean, there's not really much to audio settings. But yeah, that's really it for my settings. Go ahead, give these a try in competitive, in ranked, and whatever. Give them a try. Let me know how you like my settings. And this goes for any new setting, like I said before. It takes time to get used to new settings. So if you're not doing good with these settings and you're like, "Oh, Juice clickbaited me, these settings aren't good, blah, blah, blah." Well, don't say they're bad if you don't give it time. That's all I'm going to say, right? When I first switched to these settings, it took me probably a good week to get used to them, and it probably took me a couple months to really master them. But I really do enjoy these settings, so yeah, that's really it for this video. If you guys enjoy, please drop a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have an awesome day. Peace out.